If you are struggling with energy and you're doing everything right, that tells us that your body is probably not good at taking food and transforming it and using it into fuel for your body to then have energy. Your body is actually favoring taking food and turning it into fat, which we definitely don't want. That is the perfect recipe for weight gain and feeling like garbage, which is where many of us are. So what is the whole solution? Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the latest episode of the Metabolism and Menopause podcast, where we help you understand this new body of yours. Maybe you're starting to experience some hormonal symptoms, maybe you're post-menopause, but we know that your body is inherently different at experiencing these hormonal changes. And those old fat loss strategies just really aren't cutting it anymore. So it is time to learn how to work with your new body instead of against it, so you can open up those fat burning pathways, be filled with confidence, and get your energy back. And that is exactly what we are talking about today. We are talking about low energy because this is one of the most common complaints that we hear from women, is that they are struggling with energy. They either wake up and they're still tired, or they're doing okay and they crash at 3 p.m. or they're just feeling like they don't have the energy and vigor like they used to, right? And there are a ton of reasons that this can be happening, but I want to tackle two of the biggest ones that we see in women like 90% of the time. I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the other ones briefly in here as well when I'm talking about these major ones. But the two big ones that we see are that you're not eating enough food and that you're not eating enough carbohydrates, which seems super wild and counterintuitive, especially if you're wanting to lose weight, right? But we know if you are struggling with energy and you're doing everything right, that tells us that your body is probably not good at taking food and transforming it and using it into fuel for your body to then have energy. Your body is actually favoring taking food and turning it into fat, which we definitely don't want, right? And so how does undereating, not getting enough carbs have anything to do with that? Because it seems like that's what you've been taught to lose weight, right? Well, when we are not eating enough food, it slows down everything in our body. We're going to break it down in all of the different categories. And then of course, how can I eat more food and carbohydrates without gaining weight, right? That's a big question. But also, how can I then have more energy? Because if we have more energy, we know it's a lot easier to want to go for a walk, to go to the gym. If we have more energy, it's easier to have, healthier food choices. We are less snippy with our family, right? We just feel better. When we're exhausted all the time, it feels like everything's going wrong, right? Very easy to negative spiral. So let's dive in. The first part, when we're looking at undereating, is how it affects our hormones and stress response. And this is big because what we see is if we are not eating enough food, if we've been undereating for quite some time, we're talking like 1,200 calories, 1,300 calories, even 1,500 calories for most women is too low. And when we're eating in that low amount, we're seeing that we trigger a stress response in our body. And initially, that can feel like energy, right? This is why some people, when they start fasting, they feel like they have all this energy. It's because of that stress response that increases cortisol, because cortisol then dumps sugar into your bloodstream to provide you with energy. And so what happens is at the beginning, you might feel good cutting calories, cutting carbs, doing the fasting. And then somewhere along the way, it just stops working. Or you go back to doing it again and you do not feel good, right? Because what happens is it ends up leading to burnout, insomnia, adrenal fatigue over time, and we don't want that. And so what happens is we get something called this HPA axis dysfunction. So your brain communicating to your adrenals is not super good. And this can be from, again, prolonged restriction. And so then we have this flattened cortisol line that we do see a lot in women. And we see, really, really tired. This goes hands in hand with low thyroid, which we're going to talk about soon here. We're typically going to see that this also is going to result in no motivation, really struggling to want to work out and do anything, right? And we have a poor exercise tolerance. So things that we used to do before in our workouts that we felt like we could crush, now it just feels like it takes days to recover, or we just can't get through the workouts and really struggle. And so what happens too is we start to see with this elevated cortisol is now estrogen and progesterone can't be produced as well. And we're already struggling with that. So we don't want to tank it quicker because that's not going to feel great. And that can result in weight gain. But we're also going to see poor mood, poor sleep, metabolism slows down. So your body is worse at burning calories. It is worse at bringing food into the cells. It takes longer. So we become more insulin resistant and we become more inflamed, which already happens when estrogen and progesterone are going down. And that blocks your fat burning pathway. But also when this happens, your body wants to convert food into fat instead of food into fuel. And so that is the perfect recipe for weight gain and feeling like garbage, which is where many of us are, right? And so when we look at carbs specifically, when we're talking about cortisol and your hormones, is that without carbs, your body perceives stress more because carbohydrates bring that stress and cortisol response down. And so what happens is low carb will increase your cortisol. And so what happens is then your body dumps sugar into your bloodstream. That is what cortisol does. Tells your liver, we need more energy to meet the demand of whatever we're doing because we're not getting it from food, we're not getting it from carbs, and we're on all the time. We're constantly giving and go, 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 go. So if you are someone who is always giving, you are always on, you are a mom, you are a wife, you are high up in your work, you are a nurse, you are a doctor, you are a teacher, right? You are someone who's always giving. Your cortisol is likely going to be high, and therefore you need more carbohydrates to help bring that down. Otherwise, your body is just pumping sugar into you anyways, right? And that hormones, the cortisol that's going up, tanks your hormones, makes your blood sugar worse, slows down your thyroid, makes your liver health worse, increases inflammation, decreases energy, decreases muscle mass, increases fat gain. And so we want to make sure we're having enough carbohydrates to buffer that because we don't want that to happen, right? And so over time, this constant stress signal burns you out, disrupts your sleep, which makes blood sugar worse, slows down your fat loss, exhausts your adrenals. And this is really challenging. And you're even at more risk if you are someone who's already dealing with hormonal fluctuations, like any woman who is 35 plus. We're already going through perimenopause, or we're in menopause, or we're post-menopause. Okay, so that's the first thing. And so hormones and stress stress hormones go up, hormones go down when we are under eating and not getting enough carbohydrates. That alone will tank our energy. Then we have the effect on blood sugar, like I mentioned. When we're not eating enough and we're not having enough carbohydrates, we are going to have unstable blood sugar. This is going to lead to those energy crashes. It's going to lead to shakiness, irritability, anxiety, cravings. Who is struggling with those things, right? All of us at some point have or are going through it right now. And so what we have is reactive hypoglycemia. So your blood sugar is lower, right? And especially after exercise or long fasts, some people think, oh, my blood sugar is not an issue. No. That's like the precursor to then having a blood sugar control issue, insulin resistance. We don't want that. And so we start experiencing the mid-afternoon exhaustion. We start having that hanger feeling, right? That's a sign of low fuel intake. And many women think that cutting carbs will help stabilize their blood sugars, right? But extreme restriction and low carb actually do the opposite. And so what we see is, like I mentioned, you're in this high stress state. Your body needs energy to meet the demands. If you're not getting it from food, so even though you're fasting and eating low calorie and eating low carb and working out, your body goes, we need sugar to meet this demand. Therefore, your body tells your liver, hey, pump some sugar into here. Our liver does that, but it only has so much glycogen stores in our liver. So then it starts taking down muscle mass and breaking it down, turning it into sugar and dumping it into your bloodstream, causing your blood sugar to go up anyways. And so if we are always go all the time, we are not eating enough food, we are not having enough carbohydrates, we are fasting all the time, we can actually make our blood sugar worse, which is why we are struggling with energy and our ability to be able to lose weight. Because when insulin resistance is high, it pushes us into that fat storing state where your body tells you we have enough, let's store, even though you're fasting and eating low calorie and eating low carb and doing the workouts and eating clean. So many of you are probably like, oh my gosh, this just explains everything that I'm going through, right? When we are looking at low energy, we have to look at our metabolism as well, because your resting metabolic rate, your BMR, your how many calories your body burns at rest, right? It's what keeps you alive when you are just laying there asleep. When you're breathing, you need your heart pumping, you need your brain to be doing the things, your body to create the hormones, all the things, right? Just to keep you alive. When your calories remain chronically low, your BMR decreases significantly, sometimes by 20 to 30% or more. And the less energy is spent on non-essential functions like hormone production, which we talked about already tanks your energy, right? Hair growth, your skin, digestion, all those things slow down. and can actually accelerate aging and make weight loss a lot harder. And so we feel cold. We feel tired, mentally foggy. We start losing muscle mass, not fat, because our body goes into this conservation mode, right? And so we want to make sure that you are aware that when this starts happening, our metabolism, our body gets worse at burning calories. It's always trying to match calories in, calories out, no matter what you're doing. And it does this through internal systems by adjusting the hormones and your thyroid and all of those things. Then when we are in this state, you're going to find that you're naturally moving a little bit less because your body is instinctively moving less to conserve energy, right? We're going to see that loss of muscle mass because muscle burns a lot of calories at rest. So if we're under eating, muscle mass gets broken down, used as energy. That's not a good place to be because now we become more insulin resistant because muscle is a place that helps support blood sugar control. The less that we have, the more insulin resistant we are. The more insulin resistant we are, the more we struggle with our blood sugar, the more that we struggle with our energy, and it keeps us stuck in that fat storing state that tells your body, we have enough, let's store. Even though you're fasting and cutting calories and you're cutting carbs, you're doing the workouts and you're eating clean, right? Then we have to look at our thyroid. When we are under eating and not having carbohydrates, our thyroid takes a massive hit. This is why we recommend women to not get their thyroid function tested when they're in a fat loss phase because it is not going to be good. So thyroid hormones, especially your T3, regulate how fast your body burns energy. T3 is your active thyroid hormone, and it will decrease when you are in a calorie deficit, when you are eating less. So then we see that your body is less effective at burning calories. When your body is not good at burning calories, it's very easy to gain weight, very hard to lose weight, right? And if our body is not good at taking energy like food and using it for fuel, it starts using it and storing it as fat. We don't want that. And this is what happens when our T3 starts to slow down and there's less of it. Then we also see in this stress state from under eating and not having enough carbohydrates, we see reverse T3 come up. And reverse T3 blocks thyroid function. It prevents your T3 that you do have from going in the lock, turning the key, and then your body being like, let's burn calories. Now it doesn't get to do that because that lock is blocked. It's like the reverse T3 blocks the key from even being able to go in the hole. And so even with like your normal TSH levels, we can experience these hypothyroid type symptoms of really low energy because your body is not good at using food and burning it for fuel. It gets stored as fat and you are very tired because if our body can't use food for fuel, you're going to feel exhausted. And low carb diets are also shown to decrease that T3, your active thyroid hormone that tells your body, let's take food and use it for fuel, provide you with energy, get very good at burning calories. And so what we see is this downregulates your metabolism. It makes everything slow down, slows down digestion as well. So now you're also feeling more bloated, causes fatigue, causes constipation. You're going to feel cold more often and low mood as well. And so these are all symptoms that are very common in perimenopause and menopause. And yes, can it be perimenopause involved, right? Your hormones? Absolutely. But a lot of the time, it's because you've been under eating for way too long. This is why when we're in a fat loss phase, we specifically add in some specific refeed days. We're making sure we're not dropping our carbs too low. Typically, we're going to refeed with some higher carbohydrate days. Maybe we're down for 4 weeks and then we come up for 1 or 2 and then we come back down. There's lots of ways to make sure that we are avoiding that down regulation. But so many people just live in that low calorie state that their thyroid is like the one that controls. Is our body going to take food and use it for fuel or take food and store it as fat? And so a lot of people blame perimenopause and it can make these symptoms worse, but this has already been happening under the surface and your hormones were kind of covering up for it. Then we have mitochondrial impairment. And so mitochondria, you've probably heard of the powerhouse of the cell, right? They're the ones that create energy. So obviously, this is going to be very important for making sure that you have good energy, right? And with enough calories, especially carbohydrates, mitochondria can shift you're going to shift into this low output mode. It's going to start preserving energy and not producing as much. And this is one of the main drivers of your physical and mental fatigue. And so low intake means mitochondria slow down. There's less energy being produced. So now you have lower stamina. You're tired, you have poor recovery, and this can show up in exercise, right? Or feeling like you need naps, or you're dragging throughout the day, which Yes, yes, yes. We're actually doing a mitochondrial health challenge to improve this with our clients right now. And so we're doing things to help increase number of mitochondria in their body and also make the ones that they have healthier, and then also protecting the ones that they have. Then we have our brain. So when we're looking at food intake, we want to specifically look at tryptophan and tyrosine. These are coming from protein. And so if we're not having enough of these because we're not eating enough calories, right? We're not having enough food. We actually say that we need those in order to produce serotonin and dopamine. So dopamine, when it is low, we're going to struggle with our motivation. We are not going to have much drive. We're going to struggle with focus. We're going to have a harder time experiencing pleasure. So the things that used to bring us joy are kind of just meh. You know, you're like, oh, I used to really love this. And then you go and do it and you're like, ugh, that used to bring me joy. You know, like we're just not the same as we used to be, right? Then we have low serotonin. So this is going to result in poor sleep, irritability, depression, because serotonin is our happy hormone. And so if we're not getting enough protein, we can't build our happy hormone and we can't build the hormone that makes us motivated. That's a problem. And typically, most women don't get enough protein, let alone if they're trying to eat less calories, right? So you may also feel that tired but wired feeling. You might feel emotionally numb or just like exhausted. Those are all very common symptoms. And then when we're looking at carbohydrates specifically, your brain requires glucose to function properly. Too little, and you're going to have poor focus. You're going to be forgetful. You're going to struggle with like mental fatigue and that like brain fog that we all experience, right? You can also experience increased anxiety and irritability, especially if that neurotransmitter that we talked about, serotonin, is low. And so this is where a lot of people struggle with mental health type stuff. And yes, we know estrogen plays a big role in this. However, you need to be eating enough food and enough protein, enough carbohydrates to fuel that. Right? Our brain requires a lot of energy. And so we need to make sure that we are taking care of it. Then we have detoxification bottlenecks, which is incredibly common. You've probably heard me talk about the liver quite a bit lately and detoxification and how incredibly important it is. We know that you can be doing everything right and address all the things. You could even be eating enough food and enough carbohydrates, but if your liver is not in a good position, it is going to be very hard for you to lose weight because your body really does get stuck in an inflammatory state. Toxins accumulate, it gets stuck in our fat cells, changing the structure, making them even harder to break down than they already are, making it really hard to lose weight. And so when we're looking at the liver specifically, the liver requires amino acids that come from proteins, B vitamins, and calories in order to perform phase 1 and phase 2 detox. And when we are under eating, it slows down the detoxification process. Those toxins start to build up. We see more inflammation, which blocks our fat burning pathway, keeps us in that storage state, but also inflammation is exhausting because your body constantly feels like it has to fight something. It is like it's always on alert that there's an invader, they're always trying to look for it. That's exhausting, right? And so it takes up a lot of energy from your body. These toxins build up and they also, again, like I mentioned, go into fat cells, change the structure of them, making them harder to break down. And so what we see more fatigue. We see more brain fog, more headaches, and more hormonal imbalances. And so we also know it can affect your bile flow. That starts to slow down, which can impact your estrogen clearance as well, leading to estrogen dominant symptoms like PMS type symptoms and weight gain. And so we know that if we aren't eating enough food, if we aren't getting enough calories, detoxification will slow down. Everything in your body starts to slow down, and we don't want that. That's why when you're going to fat loss, you have to do it the right way. If you just stay at a low calorie state forever, these things will happen. You're going to plateau. And then when you try to come out of it, the risk of weight gain afterwards is going to be much higher than if you were doing this appropriately. And so this is why I have a lot of people who will ask for reverse dieting advice, right? And I give it to them. We calculate their calories for them, all that kind of stuff. And they ask me about fat loss. And it's like, I need to know how your body responds. It is very hard because some people will start to slow down much quicker than others. And so with some people, we can get away with dropping calories for 4 weeks and then just giving them a 1 week break. Other people, we got to add in, 2 higher days within their week, or we're cycling through it. Like there's so many strategies based on how your body responds, and they don't have to be super complicated, but we have to understand how your body works and how quickly it wants to slow down. If you have an extensive dieting history, it's typically going to want to slow down more quickly. And so we have to be more strategic in what that looks like for you. And then we're looking at gut function and dysbiosis. And so when we have low calories, we're typically going to have less fiber. We're typically going to have, less prebiotics. We're going to have less fermented foods. That can lead to imbalanced gut bacteria, constipation, which can both make you feel sluggish, make you feel heavy, and increase inflammation, which I mentioned is an exhausting process on your body. We know that chronic restriction can reduce your gut lining integrity, which can result in leaky gut. So if you imagine like pantyhose, when you're looking through it, not a lot of stuff can come through. If you stretch it, then you can see all the little holes. Stuff could pass through more easily, right? So when we get inflamed, it's like our gut lining gets stretched and now things can get through that aren't supposed to. And that can cause, more inflammation, more food sensitivities that you've never had before. And that's going to cause a further energy drain because your body is trying to fight all that stuff all of the time. We're going to see more bloating. We're going to see more indigestion. And that's due to slow digestive enzyme production that also happens with this. And when we're looking at carbohydrates, especially from fruits, root veggies like potatoes, our whole grains, those are a major source of prebiotic fibers, which are incredibly important for feeding our gut bacteria. So we see this a lot in people who have done carnivore for too long, who have done keto for too long or incorrectly, or people who just don't have enough of our whole food carbohydrates because we've all been so scared of them that you don't have enough feeding your gut. And so now we're dealing with a lot of gut imbalances that leads to hormone imbalances. It leads to low serotonin. Remember how I talked about serotonin is your happy hormone? 90% of it is produced in your gut. And so when our gut isn't in a good place, we're going to struggle with that as well. And so when we are eating low carb, we're typically going to see like reduced microbial diversity because of that, more constipation, more bloating, less short chain fatty acid production like butyrate, which is really important for blood sugar control. And so what we see is metabolism again, that starts to slow down because all of those things are important for keeping our body working well. And when metabolism slows down, our energy is really poor because our body is not good at taking food and turning it into fuel. And instead is taking food and turning it into fat, which again, we don't want. And then we look at immune suppression and inflammation. I've touched on this briefly already, but when we're under eating, it really impairs your immune system. It increases your susceptibility to, viral reactive type infections and things like that. So like EBV, for example, slow recovery from illness. You get sick longer, more often. And we just see inflammation go up because of that. And that can be from poor nutritional status, right? We're not getting enough of everything that we need, the omega-3s, the antioxidants, the zinc, and all of those things are going to cause low energy, the achiness, the brain fog. We get that cold/flu feeling, right? We're crashing often. That's our body it's overstressed. It's working really hard. We're underfueled. And so we need to get your inflammation and immune system back in check because otherwise you're always going to feel exhausted and your fat burning pathways are always going to be blocked. You're stuck in that storage pathway. So even though you're doing all the right things, your body is constantly telling you, we have enough, let's store. We need to change the signal within your body. But people just push harder by cutting calories more and cutting carbs more and doing more exercise, which actually makes all of this so much worse. And then we also, of course, have to touch briefly on nutrient deficiencies because we see this a lot in women who are under eating. There are some very common nutrient deficiencies that we see. So the first one's going to be low iron. We see that's less oxygen delivery to your body. That's going to obviously affect your energy. B12, folate, and B6, that's needed for energy production and your brain function. This is why we love telling women to supplement with a B50 because it's going to provide you with energy. Take that in the morning though, because if you take it in the evening, because it improves energy, it can affect your sleep. Magnesium. Magnesium is needed in over 300 processes in our body, especially our body being able to create energy, right? Calm our nervous system as well. So we want to make sure we're getting enough magnesium in our diet too. Zinc and selenium, that is needed for thyroid function. Remember, thyroid is going to tell your body how good are you at burning calories, right? When it slows down or reverse T3 is high, we're not able to tell our body, hey, let's use energy or this food as energy. Instead, it's turning food and turning it into fat, which we do not want. And then electrolytes. This is often lost in like fasts and low carb diets. And then we see like the headaches, the fatigue, the dizziness. So you want to be mindful of that as well. And so when we're looking at all of this, women's bodies are so sensitive to carbohydrate restriction and low calorie diets, especially once we hit perimenopause and menopause. And this is why you can do the same diet as your husband or your brother or your dad or your son, and they feel great. They lose 15 pounds like that, and somehow you are more exhausted and you gain 5 pounds, even though you followed the plan so much more closely than them. And it's because our body is so much more sensitive, especially once our estrogen and progesterone start to decline, because now we don't have that buffer. Before, they would help us buffer stress so we could handle a 9 out of 10. Now it's only a 5 out of 10 and everything goes to crap. So we need to be aware that we have to work with our bodies and understand what ends up being too much for it now, or technically too little, right? And so low carb also can worsen hormonal imbalances. It increases stress on your body. It downregulates ovulation, so it decreases progesterone production, which we do not want. That's the first thing that tanks in perimenopause. And then we see we're more estrogen dominant, which leads to fat gain, more inflammation, more feelings of exhaustion. And we know that it's just overall, we're very sensitive and will experience low energy type symptoms way more frequently and more commonly than men. And so we need to understand that going low carb or doing the fasting might give you a short burst of focus or appetite suppression because it elevates that cortisol, right? But if you're already someone who struggles with cortisol, or you've been doing this for too long already, it's going to slow down your metabolism. It's going to cause brain fog, gut issues, hormonal issues, electrolyte imbalances, burnout. And so ironically, the longer that you stay in a low calorie state, the less fat you're going to lose, and you're going to slow down everything. Your energy is going to tank. Your body becomes metabolically efficient, which means it burns fewer calories doing the same thing than it did 5 months ago. We don't want that, right? I want to burn more calories just sitting here and talking than I did before, not less. Because my body is worse at burning calories doing the same thing every day, obviously it's going to make it way harder to lose weight. So this means even small calorie increases can trigger weight regain. And fat loss plateaus so much quicker. And so we need to be aware of this whole process. Low calories are going to slow down metabolism. It slows down your energy. We're naturally going to move less. We're going to see muscle loss. We're going to be even more tired. We're going to see stalled fat loss. Then you're going to go even lower calorie, lower carb, do the fasting, more exercise, and then eventually you're just burnt out. Right? And so that slowed metabolism and low carb and low calorie doesn't just stop fat loss, it slows your life force. You have such poor energy because when metabolism slows down, your body is worse at taking food and turning it into fuel and better at taking food and turning it into fat. We do not want that, right? And that is exhausting. So what is the whole solution, right? Because that's what you want to know. And so there's a lot of things that you can do. And I did a whole other podcast. As if I continue here, it's going to be well over an hour. And so I did a whole podcast on reverse dieting, and you can tune into it below. I'll have it in the show notes for you. Because if you start increasing calories just willy-nilly, and you're just I'm going to jump up to 2,000, or I'm going to jump up by 300 calories, you're probably going to experience some weight gain. Or if you go from 50 carbs a day to all of a sudden 200, there's going to be some consequences there. We want to make sure that we're doing this the right way. So you can head back to episode 168. I'll have it in the show notes for you as well. But if you have questions or there's specific things that I touched on here that you'd like me to go deeper, please comment below. I'm always happy to do that. Make sure you share this with all your friends who are struggling with exhaustion and are just tired of trying to lose weight as well. And I will talk to you soon. Bye.